welcome again to those of you who are live with us. We really appreciate when you come together with us in community, and welcome to those who are watching the replay. Today's topic is reaching out to communities of color, growing an intersectional and diverse animal rights movement. And we have joining us Christopher Eubanks, who is the founder of APEX Advocacy. And I believe Kirsten's going to put that in the link so you can check that out. APEX is a new Atlanta nonprofit organization with the missions of helping communities of color defend themselves against animal industries and increasing the number of BIPOC individuals who participate in animal activism by advocating for collective liberation. So Kirsten, if you could spotlight Christopher and I, and while you're doing that, I'm going to just tell you a little bit more about Christopher Eubanks. He's a social justice advocate, creative, and public speaker raised in Atlanta, Georgia, who's dedicated himself to doing advocacy that combats all forms of injustice. After learning the horrors of animal exploitation, Christopher became vegan, began doing community organizing, and has helped co-organize Atlanta's first ever animal rights march. Christopher founded APEX Advocacy just in this past year. It's fresh, it's exciting. And Christopher, I am so glad to have you here. Welcome, my friend.
I am so excited to be here. I'm also excited to see so many people, so many friends. I see some of you all were saying hi in the chats, and I didn't get a chance to say hi to everyone. So if I didn't say hi back, it wasn't personal. It was just so many people coming in. I couldn't keep up. So hi, everyone.
Amazing. Well, we've already got almost 60 people here on Zoom and a bunch over on Facebook Live. So everybody's here to love you up, Christopher.
Likewise, the feeling is mutual.
And I got the pleasure of being able to meet and hug Chris in person at the Lead for Farmed Animals conference just just over a month ago, Chris.
I know, right?
And I'd heard about you for forever, but just to be able to just match the legend with just such a warm, beautiful being was really a thrill for me.
The legend. Oh, that's just so endearing. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I didn't mean to make you blush, but
all right.
All right. Well, Chris, let's get into it because lots of folks are really curious about what you're up to, this important work. You've been very active animal advocate for a few years now, but recently you launched your own organization, APEX Advocacy, in Atlanta. That must feel great. Just tell us more about your mission at APEX so we understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thanks for, again, having me here. Thanks to everybody that's watching and tuning in. Yeah, it definitely is a new, exciting thing to have forming. It's a lot of work, but it is worth it. It's a lot of things to keep on top of. But yeah, ultimately our mission is to really increase the amount of people of color involved in animal activism. And we have a couple of different ways that we're working on trying to bring that about. One of them is through helping communities of color directly defend themselves against animal agriculture. And that's something that I'm passionate about, and I'm pretty sure we'll discuss that a little bit more. Another thing is also thinking about ideas and initiatives that could bring more people into activism, introduce them to the idea of advocating for animals. So those ideas may not be as strong as doing direct activism, but they may be softer introductions into activism. So those are two small strategies that we have that I'm pretty sure we'll discuss more.
Chris, when and what made you realize that there was a need for the work that you're now starting to do with APEX? And why did you decide that you were the person to tackle it?
That's a great question. I think it's two things that just stuck out to me. One is just, I've done tons of events in activism. I've been doing activism for the last 4 or 5 years, and I typically don't see the diversity that I would like to see in the movement when I attend events, and it's not something that I think is only common to me. Speaking to other advocates, I think they feel the same way. And just my perception of the animal rights movement, and I'm pretty sure many people's perception of the mainstream animal rights movement, is that it's just white-centered, white-led, and I think I felt a lot of that being I felt a lot of that happening as I was doing my own activism and participating with a lot of different organizations and actions in animal rights. So that stood out to me. But one of the things that really made me feel like, okay, I know there's space for this, is that I've been doing activism for the last few years, like I said, but there's a slaughterhouse literally in my neighborhood that I had no idea about. And I've been doing actions and protests and going to vigils, and I didn't realize there was a whole community of people fighting against the slaughterhouse literally down the street from me within 5 to 10 minutes. And that just kind of made me realize that, okay, even if someone like me that's a advocate, that's dedicated, person of color, so I'm in the actual community, and the fact that I was just, I guess, so involved in the animal activism community that this particular thing just totally missed our radar made me realize that, okay, sometimes we need to bust a bubble a little bit and see what's going on and connect with people directly in the community. So I think those two things really make me feel like, okay, there's a space for an organization like this and what I'm trying to do to increase the amount of people of color in activism.
Can you give us some examples of communities of color needing to defend themselves against animal industries? I mean, you mentioned the slaughterhouses, but how that affects them, and I believe marginalized communities are really disproportionately affected by animal industries. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest examples is where a lot of these slaughterhouses are placed. And they are typically placed in communities of color or just low income or marginalized communities, which unfortunately a lot of time are people of color communities built with people of color. So, these slaughterhouses not only just negatively impact the environment there through, just having big manure pools of waste, the environmental impact that contributes to environmental racism. People having to live near these slaughterhouses are traditionally people of color more than not. And also another aspect of it is the way these slaughterhouses tend to work with prisons and how they exploit marginalized people by collaborating with them sometimes on work release programs. Slaughterhouses are typically some of the only jobs that, if you're coming out of prison or if you don't have a lot of educational experience or a strong educational background, if your resources are limited, typically the most disadvantaged people typically go to these places to work. So, and just slaughterhouses in neighborhoods in general bring about higher rates of crime, domestic abuse. It's just so many different factors of ways that people get exploited, but obviously the animals get exploited the worst. But there are still so many ways where humans get exploited, and typically the humans that are exploited through these animal agricultural practices are people of color.
There's actually a film playing right now. We have the Hot Docs Festival, which is one of the biggest documentary festivals in the world. And right now playing at it is a movie called The Smell of Money, which is all about this. And it's premiering. And folks, I really recommend, I don't know if there's any screenings left in Toronto, but anybody around the world can pay for a ticket to view it online. So that's at hotdocs.ca, I believe. And yeah, I know that some of our team members went to see it the other night. So this is, it's a huge concern. It's a huge intersection of oppressions. So, because we kind of nerd out here on strategy and campaigns and everything, Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about the community that you're, the campaign you're working on with the community right now?
Yeah, great. So the campaign that I'm working on right now is called No Backyard Slaughter. And this was inspired by the situation where I found out that there was a slaughterhouse in a community literally 10 minutes away from me. So what we're trying to do is collaborate with the people in the community to build pressure campaigns on the county to force them to close this slaughterhouse. So we are reaching out to anyone in the community. We're attending a lot of the county calls where people are speaking out against this slaughterhouse, and people are organizing against this slaughterhouse to do whatever they can to get it closed. We're reaching out directly to them and saying, hey, you know, we're a small nonprofit and we would love to help build this pressure campaign with you to force the county's hand to do more. So sometimes that means we obviously do protests. Sometimes it means we send out mass emails. Sometimes it means we do pressure campaigns. Sometimes it means we call, and we have a script where we have for people that can call the county office and leave a message for the CEO. We send these written testimonies. The county has what they call a kind of like an open call for the community, where people from the community can submit a testimony about anything that they're interested in talking about to the county. So we're getting together people and we're just storming this call about this issue. So yeah, we're doing a large variety of things to hopefully apply pressure. We're also, you know, looking at what we can hold the county accountable for legally. So we're talking about code violations that the slaughterhouse is breaking, making sure that the county is not overlooking those things also. So it's a really in-depth process that we're trying to build with the community. I think that's one of the things that is unique about what I'm trying to do with APEX, is that a lot of the people that I'm working with in this community aren't going to be vegan. It's just not, you know, vegans aren't the largest population of people. We're only like 1% of the population. But in these communities that I'm going in with, we're essentially building abolitionist pressure campaigns with non-vegans in a sense. And we're including their input. We're not just going into the community saying, hey, we have years of experience doing animal activism. This is what what should be done. We're saying, hey, these are the things that we've done, that we've seen work, but we want to know what you all have been doing, who you all have been speaking to, so we can come together and build a really strong, solid pressure campaign to hopefully bring about some type of change.
And I'm sure this is, you know, a tricky place to navigate. I know here in Canada and in AJA, we've been doing a lot of talk about collaborations with Indigenous communities, and it's very much, we definitely need to go in and we need to basically defer to them and be willing to do the heavy lifting, but for it to be community led. So Chris, how do you navigate that piece of it?
I think one of the things is, well, fortunately for us, you know, I am directly involved in the community. So it's very easy for me to talk to people, to get on a phone call with them, to meet with them very easily. But I think it just has to come from a genuine place. You definitely have to make sure that anything that you do there's an agreement on to how to go forward. And, you know, sure, sometimes you're going to have disputes, but ultimately, I think the people in the community are the ones that should lead these efforts because it directly involves them. But it is a fine balance to walk, because one of the things that we're trying to do with this initial campaign is to learn from this, you know, case study. Essentially, we're going to learn what we did good, what we didn't do as good, and hopefully going forward, we have a really solid blueprint. So right now it's a lot of trial and error. So I'm still learning some of the best ways to navigate and walk this tightrope of, you know, using our expertise and collaborating with them. One of the things I will say that we've learned, or that I was intentional about, was not necessarily targeting the person at the slaughterhouse or necessarily targeting the actual slaughterhouse facility. I think a lot of times in animal advocacy, I've seen the workers get demonized, and, you know, obviously we are against what's happening, but I think more pressure can be applied to the systems that keep them operating. So that's what we've done in this situation. We've put a lot of attention on the county and not so much attention on the individual person that's operating, because the power is in the county's hand. The power is in the system or the structures hand to actually bring about the change. The owner we're wanting to reach out to him with a proposition to say, hey, these are opportunities that you could pursue that don't have to include animal slaughter. You could transition, you could, send the animals to a sanctuary and transition to a different type of industry. But we want to make sure that we don't attack the individual. We attack the system. And that way we can still possibly leave room to approach the individual with a proposition to transition or change in some type of way.
That's such an important piece. And I mean, at Animal Justice, we do undercover investigations, and it's a real tenet of ours. Like we really try to take all of the focus off of the workers, even though, they may be doing the violations and abuse, but recognizing that they are coming from some of the most vulnerable populations. And for most of those people, they have no choice. They don't have a choice of where to work. And so, people are like, well, why, how can they do that? It's like, well, how can't they do it? So I love that piece of advice, really focusing on the system. The systems are far more destructive and huge and taking the pressure off of the individuals and even the individual owners. Chris, do you have any other suggestions? Because people are really curious about this piece of like, how do you go in and work with non-vegans? And are there any other pieces that, especially working with a lot of non-vegan Black folks, are there pieces that, if we're doing something like that, we need to really be keeping in mind and watching ourselves on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say my situation is unique because we are working together on the same campaign. So I would say one of the things that I'm doing is I'm not waving my vegan flag. I'm not asking the community to go vegan. I'm not telling them how vegan I am. Like, they know that I'm an animal rights advocate, but they don't really may not know as deeply as even some of you all know about all the activism that I do and how abolitionist I am in my approach to advocacy work. So I don't wave my V flag. I don't yell in their face about it. I don't get into disputes with them about, their dietary habits and, the fact that we may not share the same views, because at the end of the day, it isn't about veganism in terms of how I'm working with them. It's about ending the slaughter of these animals first and foremost. So that is the thing that we are focused on, and everything else. Sure, if they're interested in learning about veganism and trying to transition, I have all the information in the world for them. But
I bet you do.
Yeah, I try my best, but it's not something that I'm leading with at all. It's just something that they know where I stand. I know where they stand, but that's not getting in the way of us collaborating.
Yeah, so focusing on the commonalities and going with those. And sometimes folks, I mean, I know as animal advocates, we feel like we always need to be talking veganism up and proselytizing and everything, but sometimes just being a good being, in a situation is all people need to see to be able to open up their mind and go, well, what's going on? If they value this, maybe this is something I want to know more about, right? So,
yeah.
Chris, so some folks might say, okay, well, you get this slaughterhouse closed down and there's going to be another slaughterhouse that opens up on the outskirts of town, but it's not as simple as that. What sort of is the mechanism of why taking down a slaughterhouse in a community can actually hurt the industry?
Yeah, I think one, it just helps to, if normalize is a word, the violence and oppression in the community, that animal agriculture produces. And also, like I said, there are real consequences of having these operations in communities. So like I said, this is impacting wastewater. This is impacting people's lives and health. So if you can, take this slaughterhouse away from this community, it actually has a real world impact on the people that are living there. And, obviously it's saving the lives of animals from being killed. But I think we shouldn't just think about these things and, just breaking it down to the numbers. Like, I think sometimes when we focus so heavily on the numbers and the stats that we forget that we are actually in a position to impact real people and impact their everyday life. So if we're able to, close the slaughterhouse down, that's going to mean that there's not a slaughterhouse inside of a community next door to like the situation with this slaughterhouse is a block away from a elementary school. So just imagine having kids walk by a slaughterhouse. If we're able to close that slaughterhouse down, I mean, kids aren't walking by this slaughterhouse every day for months on end, for years. So it has real world applications that we may not see in the numbers, and the numbers may just show, okay, one less slaughterhouse out of tens of thousands were closed. But when you actually look at the impact that that has on the community, it's something that has a real world impact. And also, I think it helps to introduce the concept of speciesism and veganism into a community that probably isn't very familiar with advocating specifically against these industries that are exploiting them. So just to be able to, one, close a slaughterhouse, two, spread this message of animal rights in a community that's not maybe used to advocating for animal rights, I think it pays huge dividends long term.
Yeah, and so also somebody wrote in the chat, violence begets violence. So you've got kids walking past a slaughterhouse, it becomes normalized. That kind of violence becomes normalized. That can't help but have ripple effects and also desensitize them to the issue in the future. So thanks for explaining that a little bit more, Chris. Folks, just so you know, we will have time. We will probably have some time for a few questions at the end. So if you have a specific question for Chris, you can put **Q just so that we can differentiate it from the other chat, and we'll be collecting questions. And if we have time for some questions, I will pull some in the last few minutes. So I really want to sort of move into the sort of second pillar or related pillar of your work at APEX, Chris, and that's increasing the number of BIPOC individuals who participate in animal activism. So first of all, for folks that are coming in here and they're just like, okay, diversity, inclusion, the intersectional, I don't know. Can you explain why this is so important to the AR movement, to bring in people of color and all sorts of backgrounds to participate in animal activism?
Oh yeah, so many reasons, but I think one of the biggest things is that the vast majority of the population of the world are people of color. So if we're honestly going to get the majority of the world to mass adopt being against speciesism, it has to be reflective of the people in these actual communities in these parts of the world. We have to tailor it to, not even tailor it, we have to make it accessible to the people that we want to be against these forms of this form of oppression. So we can't, honestly treat it like it can be almost used as a form of colonization, where if we're going into other communities where we have no credibility telling them what they should and shouldn't do, and how they should and shouldn't act and do activism, that's not going to get us very far. I think if we're going to really spread the message of being opposed to speciesism, it has to have a different approach. It has to have a different perspective, and the vast majority of the world have to be included. So that's why I think it's very important that we include people of color as the global majority, so we can learn and advocate alongside with them. And not only that, I think, and I don't think I know that people of color have so much experience fighting against systems of oppression and systems of oppressions. And it's just so much information that we can pull from them and learn from them in their advocacy work that we could apply to helping to bring about collective liberation. So it's a lot that we can learn from communities of color. And it's a lot that communities of color can contribute to this overall message of being opposed to speciesism.
Yeah, so that we're not just a vegan club, we become a vegan world. Being a vegan club isn't going to help the animals, right?
Mm.
Um, and so, so people understand a little bit more. I mean, in order to grow diversity in the movement, it's important to have a movement that's inclusive. Can you give folks here a sense of what vegans of color might struggle with around the current animal rights movement? I mean, I know there's so many things. But can you give us a little rundown?
Yeah, I've had so many friends talk about burnout in terms of how, the animal rights movement doesn't acknowledge their, everything that they bring into the movement. So as a Black man, I bring a certain lens and perspective into the movement. And oftentimes, the movement has an attitude of ignoring your individuality to just advocate for the animals. So, we don't talk about race, we don't talk about sexism, we don't talk about these things because the animals are so oppressed, there's no room for these other issues. But, when we're talking with real people that experience these things firsthand, we can't tell people to shut that off, shut that part of themselves off. And we carry that into our activism. It shapes the way we view the world, view our activism. So I think a lot of people of color have come into the movement and felt their identity was oppressed, or just felt that the interlinking forms of oppression that we see happening inside the movement and in animal agriculture and animal industries, we see people ignoring that on a large scale. And I think once you see that as a person of color, you feel that this isn't the space for me. This isn't where I want to be. I can't advocate alongside people who are just saying, ignore all of these other types of oppressions that are very prevalent, and just only focus on and talk about this one specific thing. And it's not a matter of saying that, we can't focus and center the animals. I just like to say that we can't ignore the other types of oppressions that are interlinked and that are happening alongside animal abuse and exploitation.
And so, the word intersectional, I brought it up, you brought it up, and you've said that APEX is not your usual vegan nonprofit. It's colorful, bold, radical, and unapologetically intersectional. So just to bring it down, can you give us how you view intersectionality, what it means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk about it in terms of how, I'll talk about how I'm applying it into APEX. One of the things is that our board of directors are all people of color. That's just a decision that I've made. I don't think that a lot of the mainstream animal rights organizations have had to think about this when they were being constructed. So it's not something that was maybe brought to their attention. I think now the conversation is happening more, but I intentionally made APEX, the board of directors will be people of color, just because I want that perspective and that lens that really hasn't been seen much, to have a space to share thoughts and ideas and perspective and ideas about how we can do activism, how our activism approach may be different from others. But just in terms of intersectionality, I always look at it as seeing the common ways that all beings are exploited and working to fight against those systems. So we understand that when people are being exploited in animal agriculture, there's an opportunity to address the non-human exploitation and the human exploitation. So we just essentially don't turn a blind eye to all of the different systems of oppression that ultimately impact animals being oppressed.
And there's just, the different layers of oppression, to just chip away at one, that oppression, that energy doesn't just disappear. It goes to another, vulnerable sort of section of the world. And so you talk about, and many people talk about, the idea of collective liberation. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I just think that's a form of liberation where you don't exclude, And I think one of the things is that, like, even with me centering the animals in my organization and it will always be animal centered. But I also think that we have to understand that that oppression it's like a tree with different branches, and we'll always work towards advocating for any type of oppression that is happening alongside the oppression of animals, so we can convey how these systems work together and how they benefit from each other. So I think one of the things that I'm trying to do is merge any situation where I can talk about animal rights and other forms of oppression, and make it natural, make it genuine. You know, I wouldn't tell anyone in animal advocacy that, you know, all of a sudden they just have to start doing other types of activism just because there's other types of things that need to be spoken about. While that's true, I think there's tons of people advocating for tons of causes. I think just our lens comes from a place where we say, you know what, we know the animals are being exploited, and what other systems are in place, what other beings are being exploited alongside the animals, and how can we fight for that? And I think that's what true collective liberation is, not excluding anyone from the circle of compassion.
Well, and so that idea, and first of all, thank you, Chris. These are not easy things to define necessarily, but I know you're old pro at this. So one of the words that I really noticed in that like piece that I pulled from your website was unapologetic. Why would you have to apologize for being intersectional? Share a little bit about what some of the criticisms are that come up, and you know, how you counter those criticisms.
Yeah, it's definitely very nuanced. I would say one of the reasons I say we are unapologetic is because we have an abolitionist approach. So, you know, other organizations and people and groups, you know, do things like, you know, maybe Meatless Mondays or reducitarianism. And while we don't shun anyone for having those types of initiatives or even welfarist approaches, it's just not something that we do at APEX. We focus our activism and our efforts through an abolitionist approach. But in terms of, you know, maybe why some people may be turned off from that, I don't know. Sometimes I think sometimes the animal rights community has a certain perspective, a certain, we're seeing through a lens where we are sometimes considered like extremist or things like that. And that's not always the case. I think you can be unapologetic about what you believe in, but it doesn't mean that you have to be offensive, hardcore, negative, or aggressive. I think those aren't mutually exclusive. So we're definitely unapologetic in how we are, but we don't feel the need to apologize. We don't feel that we have to tone our message down. You know, we have an approach that we have is very professional. We consider it professional. We consider it compassionate, but we are very staunch in our approach to being against all forms of discrimination towards animals. And sometimes people may not see things that way, but I don't think you ever have to pivot from your position just to appease people or to make people comfortable. You can still stay staunch and still stay firm without being, you know, offensive and just disrespectful towards others. Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive.
One of, you know, leading up to this, I heard a criticism from somebody. Of course, I always hear criticisms, you know, with the panels that we host and things like that. And they said there are some Black activists who have an attitude of, you know, we don't care if you include us or not. We'll do it ourselves. We'll do it our own way. I'm sure you've gotten this before. So why should we be bothering, you know, spending all this time on intersectionality when, you know, there's Black folks who don't want our help, who don't want to be part of the movement? How do you respond to that?
I think that's a very layered question. I think what comes to mind with that is, one, just because some may not want to be involved, it doesn't mean that we should exclude, you know, a whole group. So they're like, you know, one of the things about vegans is sometimes people view us as pushy and, over the top and, pretentious. It doesn't mean that all of us are like that or that we should be all viewed that way. So if there are some Black people or people of color that don't want to be involved in animal activism, okay, then you speak to people that are receptive. You speak to those who want to be included. But also, on another note, I don't think that people specifically have to be involved in the animal rights community to do animal rights activism. I think that, like I said, a lot of people that I know that were doing this work, they got burnt out and decided to leave the movement. It doesn't mean that just because you leave the doing work with the largest organizations or predominantly animal rights organizations, it doesn't mean that you can't do animal advocacy. I mean, there are people that aren't vegan doing animal advocacy. So yeah, I don't think that you necessarily have to be in the movement, in the actual movement, to do animal advocacy.
I guess, one of the things, though, about having people of color in the movement is where the money is, right? That's where you can get the kind of funding that will really allow you to grow and have a more powerful influence. So, how do resources translate to bandwidth for people of color? I mean, marginalized communities already have less bandwidth for activism because of their own struggles. So is that are those resources a pretty big deal for activists, especially Black activists, to be able to really get out there and have that particular specific voice amplified?
Oh, that's a huge hurdle, just from experience and from the people that I know that are doing activism with a collective liberation lens. Funding is real. It is a real hurdle to get over. Like, even with my organization, I'm in the very beginning baby phases. I have not received much funding. I have some, but compared to what a lot of the other organizations are doing and other people that I know in advocacy work, it's minimal. It is just a fraction of what other organizations are doing and are have at their disposal. So yeah, it is a real barrier. Like I said, I don't think that's the only way to do activism. I think that, you can do activism with no money. You can do activism with a big budget. But I do think that there needs to be equity within the animal rights community, where people of color have a seat at the table, where we have decision-making power, where a large amount of the organizations and the board of directors at these organizations and the funders aren't just exclusively predominantly white men or white led. So we do need to bring about that equity. A part of that is having more organizations like mine and organizations like Vegan Activist Alliance and Afro Vegan Society have more equity in this space. It's important to show that, okay, these organizations can exist, and also that there are organizations that are doing incredible advocacy work that aren't being funded nearly to the level of these other organizations. So it is a very real hurdle. And I don't want us to make it seem like if we can't get funds, the activism can't be done, but it's a real thing. We have to survive. We have to find a way to do these things consistently. And obviously funds make things a lot more easily available, and it makes it to where, people can advocate on a consistent level. And, we shouldn't have predominantly white organizations getting 90% of the pot or 95% of the pot, and everybody else just getting, excuse me, getting, maybe 5 to 10% of the pot. So it definitely does need to be more equity, so it's a more balanced playing field.
Because otherwise we're hitting a ceiling, because as you said, the global majority of this planet are people of color. And if it's the white organizations that are doing all of the advocating, or 90% of the advocating, we're going to stop at white populations. That's a pretty good, pretty good suspicion, is that that's where it's going to stop. And so one of the things that I want to ask about with APEX is, well, so this brings us back to one of the other things that I think people of color have a really hard time with in the animal rights community is representation, not seeing, faces like theirs, in the sea of protests, and not seeing people at the top of organizations. And yet a Pew Research Center study shows that 8% of Black Americans are vegan or vegetarian compared to 3% of the general population. So how are you going about increasing the number of BIPOC individuals participating in animal activism through APEX? What are some of the strategies?
Yeah, so excuse me, a couple of the strategies, like I said, are one, collaborating with the actual communities. Like a lot of the work that we're doing is going to be pressure campaigns, essentially built by communities of color. Like that's our focus with our campaigns. We're looking for specific instances where communities of color are being exploited by animal agriculture. And we're aligning ourselves with that community and saying, hey, what can we do to help? How can we collaborate? How can our team be a resource to you? And we want to use that as an introduction to have them come into activism or the animal rights space. So that's one of the things that we're doing. Another thing that we're doing is a lot of the initiatives that we have, like Black Vegan Everything is a website dedicated to showcasing Black-owned vegan businesses and organizations. So we want to show that the full spectrum of veganism is expressed throughout various communities of color, throughout various Black communities, and it's not just something that is associated with food. So essentially, all of the initiatives and the things that we do are geared toward people of color in advocacy spaces or advocacy centers and advocacy organizations and initiatives. So, bringing on more people of color as a part of our team. I've had people just randomly message me about looking for a job in this intersectional animal rights space. And I wish I had the funds and the resources to bring everyone on, but I'm just such a small organization. But I think, we can, the goal is to make space for people of color at APEX. So we can, I don't want to say just be an example, but, in some regards, be an example that abolitionist animal rights initiatives can be done with people of the global majority. And, there's, like I said, other organizations out there doing incredible things. And when you look worldwide, there's incredible people in South America and Asia and other parts of the world where people of color are advocating for animals. I just think that, we haven't seen too many in the mainstream represented advocating for animals. So I think what I want APEX to be is an example that, we can do this type of activism. It can consist of largely people of color, and we can be as unapologetic and get as much done, if not more done, for animals.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, a couple real quick lightning round questions from folks here, because I know you need to go right at one, Chris. So Ken is asking, what is the reception like from the county when approaching them with animal ag issues, like with the community? When you're going in, what have been some of the reactions to this?
Yeah, it's not received as well as we would like. We have more reception from the community, but I think the county's just, more or less, most of the world contributes to the exploitation of animals. 99% of the world consumes animals, wears animals, eats animals. So for the vast majority of people, it just doesn't resonate. But I think one of the approaches that we're trying to take is show how damaging it is to the overall community. So we haven't really been emphasizing the animal rights issue. We're mainly emphasizing the negative impact that it has on the community. Although it is an animal rights issue, we know if we lead with that, we won't get as much support as we would like. But the county, they still haven't been extremely receptive. They do want to close the slaughterhouse, and they've issued cease and desist orders, but they just haven't been as adamant about carrying out all of the steps to actually get it closed until more recently when we've been applying pressure. Now they're starting to communicate with the community more and let them know, the process and how far along they are in terms of closing the slaughterhouse. So not as receptive as we would like, but
you're going to change that, Chris.
Exactly. Yeah, we're absolutely going to change it.
Chris JV says, I'm a female POC, and I and the many BIPOC individuals I advocate with have found no reciprocity from individuals in other social movements we support. We will continue to support total liberation. However, we are disappointed to see animal people seem to be the only ones who largely have this perspective. What are your suggestions for increasing interest in members of other movements to help non-human animals? So on an individual level, Chris, do you have any suggestions, like when you are doing work in other movements, again, from a heartfelt, genuine place, you're there, advocating for Indigenous rights or racial equity, or what are some of the things that people could do to help in this situation?
Yeah, I think one of the things is always just be genuine. Don't go in it with the attitude of trying to prove to someone why they should, and listen to what they feel is holding them back from thinking about animals in a more compassionate and inclusive way. Because I think when you do this, you actually get to respond to their actual concerns as opposed to like trying to win an argument. So I think that's one of the things, you listen and actually reply to their actual concerns instead of thinking about going into this conversation or this space trying to win over people. And I think when you do that, you'll be very effective, or probably more effective than you would imagine. But also, supporting these other groups, which I'm assuming, which is being done, going into these spaces and collaborating with them and making it a collaborative effort goes a long way. If you support people, for the most part, I think people will support you if you support them. Sure, there are some that won't and just don't feel obligated to, but if you're genuine in your support, you can bring up these conversations and talk about these things in a genuine way. But yeah, definitely supporting them, and also, helping them understand that the oppression of animals is something that has been given to us and normalized to us by colonization. When we think about how animals are viewed as lesser than, that's something that was inherited to us, that was given to us and forced upon us. I think before we were colonized and as people of color, we had a more harmonious relationship with non-human animals. But when we were mass exploited, we were given this hierarchy that, white men, white women, Black men, or people of color men and people of color women, like there's a hierarchy. And the more that we feed into that, the more that we are unintentionally supporting this idea of discrimination and exploitation. So we just have to let people know that, by supporting the exploitation of animals, we're doing harm to our overall society, not just to animals.
Excellent points to keep in mind, Chris. And JV says no, they haven't reciprocated so far. But JV's, it's a longer, as we know in activism, it takes sometimes 21 times hearing the same message for it to sink in. So even if you're showing up 21 times just being cool and being awesome, that might eventually, it just may not happen tomorrow or next week or next year, but keep going, and those seeds are planted and they're going to grow.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Chris, before you go,
lastly, don't be tied to your results. Be tied to your effort. Once you just continue to do what you do, you let the universe do the rest and let the chips fall where they may.
Planting seeds. Chris, how can AJAers here and watching the replay best step up to support the work of APEX right now? Donations, is there anything in particular we could share? Is there a platform you'd particularly like our follows on? Tell us what we can do to support.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you can go to apexadvocacy.org, and it has our support page on there. You can support us through one-time donations. I think we have a GoFundMe and a PayPal link there. But you can also support us on Patreon monthly, starting at $2 a month. There's different options. And that's the Patreon right now is patreon.com/Soul Eubanks. But if you go to apexadvocacy.org, the Patreon link is there. And like I said, you can support us on a monthly basis. Even if it's $2 a month, it really helps out just because as a small organization, just knowing that we'll have X amount of money every month to operate helps out a lot with what we can do and the people we can bring on. But we'll definitely take one-time donations also. So those are some of the best ways to support.
Amazing. Chris, I've taken us off of Spotlight. If you go to your top right-hand corner view and go to gallery, you're going to be able to see all the folks that are here. There's so much love for you in this chat. Shreya said, drop that mic, my friend. Way to go, Chris. Cheryl said, I have learned so much from this. People are just loved you. Everything. Yeah, I'll send you all these comments later, Chris, so you can see all the admiration.
Yeah, because you know, on the call we're just talking, so
I know there's so much good stuff that's been shared here, and we love what you're doing, Chris. We fully and completely support you, and any initiatives that you need a gang of us behind, you let us know, and we'll step up. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you all
right.
so much for being
here. AJ Ayers, can we thank Chris in an AJ style? Yes. Okay, Chris, keep doing your beautiful work, and I hope to see you soon. Okay. Absolutely. Bye, folks. We'll see you soon. Next 2 Thursdays from now, May 19th, our next Lunchtime Live. We'll be announcing that soon. If you're not already on the email list to get those notices, make sure you sign up at animaljusticeacademy.com. All right, folks, have a wonderful week. Mwah.
See you next time.